Welcome to the Existential Empath Podcast. My name is Tanya, and I am an intuitive empath. My intention is to share valuable tips, tools, and techniques that I have learned so you can tap into your own inner healer naturally and intuitively. Welcome back, everyone. Today I have guest Seth Eliot Santoro. Seth is a psychic medium, animal communicator, death doula, and best-selling author of S.M.I.L.E. From the Inside and From Grief to Grace. Seth is no stranger to tragedy. He has cheated death various times and has come face to face with thousands of people grieving the loss of their loved ones. He understands death from both sides, the physical and the spiritual. Seth is on a mission to inspire everyone on the planet to heal and smile from the inside. Welcome, Seth. It is such a joy to have you on the show today.
Hey, Tanya, I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for saying that. I love that you're like everyone on the planet. That's so great.
Yeah, we're going to light up the planet here.
Right. It's true, though. I mean, that's my goal, is to really help everyone see that healing is a possibility for them, you know?
Absolutely. And so we're going to talk about how to smile from the inside when overcoming loss, trauma, and hardship, right? So sometimes we lose our smile, especially when we go through a loss of a loved one or even a pet, for that matter. We could be struggling in our lives, or maybe our lives just aren't working out the way that we had planned. And so, Seth, you've been through some difficult times in your life that have led you to where you are today. So can you briefly share your story? And I'd like to also hear how you discovered your psychic abilities, specifically your ability to speak with deceased loved ones as well as animals.
Sure. Okay, yeah. Where to begin? By the time I was 8, everyone on my mother's Jewish side had passed away. I wasn't allowed to go to any of the funerals or any of the services. I think, and I just kept losing people along the way.
I just saw a spirit, just something right over your head just went.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, really?
That was cool.
Nice. So and then, let's see. At 18, I went to Ecuador, where I was first held at gunpoint by the cartel, like by the Colombian cartels. That was interesting. Then, all these things happen, right? Yeah, there's so many stories. I'm like, but the idea is I went to college early. I knew that there was so much more to life. I knew that I wanted to help people. When I was 5 years old, I remember exactly where I was. And I just decided that I want to help people. I don't know how, and I didn't know what that looked like. So I wanted to be a firefighter. I wanted to be a figure skater or a lawyer or an actor. Like, those are my ideas at 5 years old, right? So, because I wanted to either make a lot of money and then help people, or I wanted to just help people right away, I guess. So, in my 20s, I lost 5 friends in 2 years, like, and good friends, not like just anyone off the street. And it became like I started to converse with them, but I thought it was just kind of normal. Like, I thought that I was pretending to talk to them.
After they passed?
After they passed. And I would know things, but I didn't realize how I knew them. And then I moved to LA, like from New York, and I started to play this game at parties where I would guess where people were from within like a minute of meeting them. And with like 95% accuracy, I would guess not only the state, but sometimes like the region within the state So it was pretty crazy. And so all these things were like leading up to something, right? Then I was held at gunpoint in Mexico for an hour with the cartels, and that was very scary. It's in all of my books. And I survived that. My boyfriend seroconverted to HIV positive, and I didn't. So and I thought we were monogamous, which we weren't, apparently, not to me. So all of this stuff happened, and this was all by the time I was like 32.
Wow.
And I remember waking up on some random day, and I had broken up with the boyfriend that had seroconverted to HIV positive, and I was with a new person. And I remember waking up 2 years into the relationship, and I said to myself, I deserve so much better Like I deserve to be with someone that loves me the way I need to be loved and I want to be loved. And then the next day after that, the world opened up to me. That's how I explain it. That's the only way I can explain it. I started to know things about anyone, right? I would have dinner with a friend and someone I didn't know necessarily, and I would just start getting all sorts of feelings. And one particular evening, I was sitting having dinner, and this woman mentioned her mother. And I was like, oh, and I was like, I knew she had passed. I knew it was 10 years before that, and all this information started flowing. And I said, was that about 10 years ago when you lost her? And she's like, yeah, how could you possibly know that? I was like, oh, it's this new thing that's happening in my life. Like, I had no idea how to explain it, right? So I was, and so she started to talk a little bit more. And then I just kept seeing this beautiful ribbon outside of a gate. And there was a pool inside the gate. It was a very insane, like, setup with an apartment complex. And I was like, can I just explain to you what I'm seeing? And then she just started losing it. She's like, oh my God, that's where I grew up. And even to the bow, she was like, I put that ribbon there. And I was like, oh my God. And
Wow.
she's like, what are you? Are you a medium? And I was like, what? Oh, you mean like Long Island medium? No, no. I'm just
Like
feeling
Tyler
things.
Henry?
Right, or yeah, right. He didn't even exist back then. He was probably wasn't even born then.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that's how it started. And it took me about 9 or 10 months to start coming out again, right? So like the first time was when I was like 16, 17 is like gay. And then
Uh-huh.
this time was 34 and I was like, oh my God, what's going on? I didn't know I didn't know anything about it. I didn't have friends that were mediums, so I reached out randomly and thank God, like I started to practice with people and take some courses and start studying, right? And understanding that I'm not going crazy or that I'm not but that this is actually happening to me. So for me, the gifts really started with mediumship. Like I could immediately start connecting with deceased loved ones, humans. Um, then 2 years later, in terms of my study, I realized that every medium is also psychic. I
Yeah.
didn't know that. Like I didn't know that. So, but not the reverse, right? So I started to tap into like I call it the intuitive side of people, right? The not so distant past, the present, and the not so distant future. I mean, you know this, but I'm
Yes.
explaining it more
Mhm.
for everyone else, right? Um, so then I just started to do energy work with like Reiki and healing, and I was like, oh my God, I can kind of heal people. And I started to heal like headaches of like people that I worked at. And by the way, I was in corporate America this whole time. So I was in HR, which is so strange, but that's
I've had a lot of intuitive guests in HR. It's really funny.
really,
Yeah.
oh, that's so hilarious.
It's because you're bucking
I
the
love it.
system. That's what I
Yeah.
keep saying.
I love it. I love it. I know that there were so many reasons why I was placed in HR and I feel like I've helped so many people and revived so many cultures, because of my HR work. Anyway, so after the healing, I noticed that I started connecting with prenatal, like I call it prenatal
Oh,
readings. So I
wow.
would read for women who are pregnant. Yeah, which is like, so it's kind of the gift that keeps on giving. And then the latest one is animals. And I didn't know that I could talk to animals until I was doing a mediumship reading for someone. And I was like, hey, can we talk about your dog for a minute? And she's like, you want to talk about my dog? And I was like, yeah, I know that you have the water bowl and the food bowl right next door to one another, right? She's like, yes. And I was like, you got to separate it because he's constantly getting food in there. She's like, oh my God, I get so mad and I take away his water. And I was like, that's not right. Like I was like, why don't you get one of those raised platforms that separates it at least a little bit? And so she then calls me a couple of weeks later and she's like, oh my God, he is so happy. Like he
Oh,
doesn't now get his like water and his food in his water and he's so much happier. And I was like, oh my God, I guess I can talk to dogs too. And then from there, when like I spoke to a snake once. I mean, like then and I'm almost done with this, but then like a couple years ago, my husband is South African, and we were in South Africa, and we were at a cheetah farm, a cheetah rehabilitation farm.
mhm.
And long story short, I met the owner. I had done research, so I knew who the owner was. And I told her, I was like, listen, because she came and met everyone, and everyone was South African but me. And we live in Hollywood, which is more interesting apparently to her than anywhere else in
Oh,
South
of course.
Africa.
Yeah.
So so I said, by the way, you know that your black leopard is having an issue with his back right leg. And she's like, how could you possibly know that? And I was like, because I can kind of talk to animals. And she's like, what? So she sends the group on, and she's like, you come, you three come with us. So then we go into this beautiful like enclosure. And she's like, I want you to talk to Mary. And I was like, who's Mary? And she's like, you'll see. So we go into like this enclosure with this full-grown cheetah. We have a handler with us,
Wow.
and she goes in and calms her down, and and then she's like, okay, you're fine. She's used to humans, blah blah. And I was like, what is going on? So she's like, I want you to talk to her and see what she says. So essentially, I knew she had cancer, and and Mary said to me, like, I have far less days ahead of me than I do behind me. And I was like, did you just say that to me? Are you kidding? Like I'm like,
In your
oh
mind,
my
so you're hearing
God.
it in your mind's
I'm
eye,
hearing it.
almost
I'm
like
like, are you
telepathically.
kidding me?
Okay.
Yeah. And I was scared of her, and she's like, there's no need to be scared of me. And then the handler knew I was scared. I said, why is she not more scared of us? I mean, and he's like, because she knows that she has a claw or an opposable thumb or whatever that she could cut your throat. And she knows that she can do that. So
He has
she's
the
not, and
power.
she's been around humans, right? So like, she knows that any friend of like the owner is okay, right? If they let her in. So afterwards, I spoke to the owner. We all cried. Then I connected to a medium. I'm sorry, mediumistically, I connected to another cheetah, her very first cheetah that I didn't know had died the previous year. So we cried, we laughed. So I mean, it's the gift that keeps on giving, and I can't wait to see what's next.
That's amazing. And so can you do this on command, or is it something that just happens? Because for me, say for example, like, a client comes through and says, can you connect with my cat? And sometimes I can't always connect with the cat, but I could be out at the store and I pick up on some lady's cat, So for me, it's not always on command. It's more
Right.
just random that it will happen. So is there any advice you can give to make it be on command?
Well, so I get the randoms too, for sure, right? Like I'm out, I'm like, I really need to say this, I really need to say this, and then
Yeah,
they like my
you
heart
feel
goes
compelled
palpitating,
to
like,
say something.
right, right. I call them drive-by readings. But so what I have always done is 5 minutes before a reading, I will sit down and I listen to the same music. I say the same thing to myself, like my little manifest, and I get into a space and I just breathe. And generally within the first couple minutes, like I'm with them, right? Or if when I'm really connected, I always take a shower before I do a reading,
I do too.
and
I
they'll
do too.
always
Yeah.
come to me in the shower. Like
Me
they'll always come
too.
to me. It's
I'm telling you, the
I'm-
amount of information I get in the shower is insane. Days before a client, days
Yes.
before.
Yes, no, for sure. I was reading for Robin McGraw, Dr. Phil's wife, and the day I found out that I was reading for her that night, like her mother-in-law came to me and said all these things, and I was like, "Oh my God, can you not come? Can you please come back to me in like 3 days and we're doing the reading?" Which she did. Um, but
I
and
can't take
Robin was
notes in the shower. I'm going to forget all of
right,
this. And it comes through
right,
so fast. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So I suggest like having like a rhythm. What I don't do is like when people find out I'm a medium, they're like, "Oh, can you tell me about blah blah blah?" I'm like,
Yeah.
"No, if you want, like, I know the intention behind it, and if I'm feeling something, I'm gonna say it to my friends, and they know that and respect that. But if that happens, I'm like, if you really want a reading, you can book it. Like, here's my link,
Yeah, because it's like a
Um,
phone call, the way I explain it. It's like, if we want to connect through a phone connection, then that's when we can pick it up. But there are times
yeah,
when it's just a random phone call and you're like, oh, I'm at the store and my side hurts and it must be this lady standing next to me. And
yes,
I turn around,
yes,
hey, do you have some right hip pain? Because I'm picking up on it right now. But
yes.
yeah, so I
That
get
is
that too. People are like, oh, what are you reading about me right now? And I'm like, girl, I'm like, listen, I'm sitting here having some lunch. I don't want
right,
to pick up
right,
on that.
right, totally. Um, Yeah, that happens. That happens a lot. I'm glad that you said that because it does happen a lot.
Yeah. And so, okay, so how do you receive your information? I can share how I receive mine. Oftentimes it's
Sure.
through a feeling, clairsentience, like I'll
Okay.
feel the pain in someone's body, or I can hear an animal communicating. There was one time when I lived in Florida, I was sitting at the pool and I
Yeah.
had my eyes closed and I just started hearing, hi, I'm Jimmy. And I'm like I'm looking around and I'm down here. And I'm like, I'm laying on my stomach on a beach chair. I look down and there's a little lizard just bouncing his
No
head,
way.
full on conversation. And I'm thinking, am I crazy? Like, this
Oh
is
my
when my
God.
abilities to, okay, I've always been able to speak to animals, but as a child, I shut it off because I got picked on and, whatnot.
Sure,
But
sure, sure.
and several years ago, it started to amp up again. And so that was the first time I recognized that something was communicating with me and I was just caught off guard by it. And he was excited that I was actually able to communicate, with him, because he made the comment, most humans don't, and I've had this happen. I'll be on a hike and I'll hear the elementals, the little people, the tree people, all these things just
Wow.
chat, 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 chat. And my friend laughs because she can feel them. And she's like, all right, somebody's here. And I immediately start hearing them. So I know my ability to feel and hear are very powerful. Now, are you able to see in your mind's eye? How does it come through for you?
So I use all the clairs,
You're like
you
all the
know.
above.
No, like it depends on what I'm doing or where I'm at, right? So if I'm sitting with a reading, it's very clairvoyant, right? So I see a lot of images. I also I feel people's pain
Yes.
points,
Mhm.
whether they're dead or alive or animals. So I'm clairsentient for sure. So I feel a lot of things. I think um when I'm doing like intuitive readings or what I call intuitive business coaching, so I work with executives and help them kind of live a better life, find their smile again, and like go kick ass, right?
Yeah.
Um, for that, it's a lot of claircognizance. So I don't know how I would know that there's going to be a female in a meeting and she's going to be very numbers driven. Like I don't know how I would know that, you know? So it first comes in that way. Yeah, I think those are my main ones. Yeah, those are my main ones. Because every once in a while I'll hear something, but I have a very similar story to the lizard. It was with an elephant.
Uh-huh.
So we go to South Africa, like we try and go once a year. And we were in South Africa and we were playing with elephants. And I remember connecting to this elephant and I remember seeing his eye. Um, as soon as he realized, oh my God, this human understands me,
Yeah.
like his eye shifted towards me, and I was like, "That's right, I got you." And then he like made a joke, like immediately made a joke with the elephant over there, and they looked at me, and then made like there were four elephants together, and then they all started laughing. Like I just heard all this like laughter, like, "Oh my God, that human can speak to us." Like not very many humans can do that,
Yeah.
and I was like, oh, right. I am a human. Like I remember like, oh wow. And like elephants are just so incredible.
Yeah.
Like
And
just,
horses too. I feel like
oh yeah.
elephants and horses,
Yeah,
so intuitive. Oh my goodness. Yeah.
absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
so
And
I've been working
yeah.
with my cat because, I was thinking, hey, buddy, in my mind's eye, I'm like thinking, hey, buddy, you can communicate with me anytime. And something I learned from another animal communicator that I had on the show is that animals like images. So when you can visualize, like, say you want them to go to the food bowl, instead of saying, hey, go to the food bowl in your mind, you can visualize them walking to the food bowl and they will process that.
Mm,
So I've been
yep.
actually working with that with my cat. And it's funny because he's been responding, like he'll look up at me or he'll reach
Wow.
his paw out or, and I'm like, he's actually seeing, and it's also helping me in improve my clairvoyance as well. I think in a past life, I was in the witch trial, all that stuff. So I closed that bad boy down. I was like, shut off the faucet. And so it's
I
funny
love it.
because it's like, it's like anybody, you lose a sense, say you're blind, your other senses get stronger. And so I do feel that clairvoyance was kind of shut off for me. And then my other senses, like
Mm,
my clairsentience is insane. I can hear things a mile away. And I'm like, whoa, like, where's this coming
wow.
from? And so
Wow.
I've learned to fine tune
Yeah.
that a little bit, but yeah, it's really powerful when an animal responds to you because they recognize that you can hear me. You can,
Right.
communicate with me.
Right. I've also, speaking of cats, I've noticed that dogs are always open to it,
Uh-huh.
always open to like understand, communicating with me. And I totally believe animal like dogs are the most kind of visual for me because that's how they only speak to me in symbols and images. But cats for me, like if they don't want to let you in, then they won't. Like that's my experience.
Yeah.
Like I've had some cats that are like, I don't really want to talk to you.
Like,
Like
leave me
I don't know
alone.
you.
Yeah.
Yeah, seriously. Like they have much more.
They're a bunch of Virgos.
Totally,
No,
totally,
I just joke.
totally.
Virgos are like, let me see if I like you or not first, and then
Yeah,
we'll have a conversation.
yeah,
No, but it's true. Dogs
yeah.
are
I'm on
much
the.
more open to that. Yeah, I can sense that too, for sure.
Yeah, yeah. It's
That's
fascinating.
funny. So, well, let's change subjects a little bit. So,
Sure,
Seth,
sure.
I worked in grief and loss for nearly 20 years in the field of organ donation and transplantation. And I
Oh
was at the
wow.
bedside for hundreds of people that took their last breath and crossed over. And so this was a time for me. I think part of my intuitive mastery was I began to recognize I had intuitive abilities beyond, say, the third dimension. I was seeing souls leave the body. I was seeing what are known as walk-in souls or soul exchanges, where they were leaving and then coming back in. I was seeing different myths. I
Wow.
was hearing and seeing disembodied spirits. And I could also receive messages from those that had crossed over. So some of my organ donors, when they passed, they actually came to me in the dream state and would give me information to share with their loved ones. And at this time, I wasn't privy to my mediumship. I didn't understand. I just thought it was a dream.
Got it.
And there was one instance where it had come to me in a dream. A donor had come to me in a dream and shared some information for his mom. And I held it to myself. Well, a year later, we had an event and I ran into his mom and I shared with her, hey, I ended up having a dream about your son the night after we recovered his heart. And I shared just kind of nonchalantly the dream, and it had something to do with a key and a location. And her face just, I needed that information. Thank you so much for sharing
Wow.
with me. And had I
Oh,
known,
that's
I would have shared it
amazing.
with her much sooner, but I didn't really realize that what was coming through to me was of value, to someone else. And
Sure,
so,
sure.
like you, Seth, I'm very comfortable with talking about death. It's not something that spooks me. It scares me. Part of my family ran a funeral home in our town. And so
Oh,
I
I
was
was feeling
around
that.
dead people. Yeah. And then I took death and dying in school. I worked for a hospice. I worked in donation. I was literally around dead people more than I was around the living for more than 20 years. And so you are a death doula. Tell us what that is and why are you so comfortable around death?
So a death doula, from my perspective, is helping not just the person who's leaving this plane, right? So not just the person who's dying, but also helping the family, right? So it's how they all adjust, how they all manage their emotions, and I can have conversations with the deceased or the soon to be deceased that most living people couldn't.
Mhm.
I can also help the family understand what's happening. I can also help them to kind of tell them this is what's going to happen, right? Like it's that this is what happens next, then this happens and this happens. But then I realized, and I'm new to the death doula world. I've only done a couple of cases and I'm certified and all stuff. But like I also know that I can help the family after and the person who's deceased after. So I can give them readings after and give them messages after, just like you were explaining.
Yeah.
So like when I was in death doula school, getting my certification, the woman was like, "That's amazing. I
Death
wish."
doula school. It's at a
Uh,
funeral home and you got to connect with all these deceased people. No, you're going to the hospital.
right, right.
I
What
think I
my
went through death doula school without knowing I was going through it.
You did in an experiential way, right?
Yes.
My instructor was very much like, "Oh my God, this is amazing! Like you can do the whole thing. Like most death doulas like are sensitive, but you can actually go the whole way and like talk to them." So I experienced it myself with my own mother-in-law about a year and a half ago, and so that was the final kind of like this is now happening, and watching her die and pass was terrific and terrible and awesome and awful and all the things. So I feel like I have information that about death that most people don't have. I feel that I've learned so much and just doing it for 10 or 15 years. So I can't even imagine like 20, 30 years like from
Yeah.
now, right? Where like all the wisdom I will have gained, right? But right now I feel like I've learned a lot. So through death, I feel like I've learned more about life and adversity than anything else. And there's just so many people out there that are sad, that are depressed, that aren't truly themselves, and they have walls up. And like I really want to help people bring those walls down. I really want to help people um, move through grief, whether that's from any type of loss, not just death, right? But to move through grief. And what I tell people, intentionally, intuitively, productively, and effectively. And so, and I think death, I believe that there's three definites in this life. There's taxes, there's death, but there's also adversity, because we're not going to
Taxes
get
are
through
going
this life.
away. I put that
Yeah.
out in the universe.
Someday.
Not my
Yeah.
reality.
Yeah. So that's why people can be so paralyzed.
Yeah.
They can be so paralyzed by death. And that's why I put together, I know you're probably gonna ask this later, but that's why I put together one of my programs, is to help people overcome paralyzing grief. Like they can't get out of bed, or they've lost their focus, right? So I help like influencers, executives get out of their own way with tools. So I provide tools to them and insights and methods to help them move through it, productively and effectively. So
Yeah, and it's so hard because when you go through a loss like that, you know, everything in the universe is based off of energy, frequency, and vibration. And when you go through a loss, you're in those lower frequencies, those lower vibrational states, and it makes it difficult for you to be open to receive information from your loved ones. And so I always encourage people to remember the positive things about your loved one, and you'll get into that state of happiness or joy just by thinking about that versus thinking about the loss, of the loved one. And so that's when I know, because I lost my grandmother about probably 2.5 years ago. And anytime I call upon her, she is there. I immediately feel her, but I'm also in a very joyful energy when I think about her. Now, there was a time when I was in a grieving, sad,
of course.
heavy energy, but I moved through that because I understand now she's always with me. She's not gone. She's just gone in the physical. I just I can't physically hug her, but I can energetically hug her, and she can hug me, and I can feel that. And so when we understand that, there's more to the process of death, and that our loved ones are still there with us, just not for us to physically touch, it makes the grieving process better. I feel, at least for me, I would witness
Yep.
all those deaths that I witnessed all those years. I had never suffered one myself until recently with my grandmother, but I took all those tools that I learned, from watching others and moving through that, because the stories that we tell also hold us in that frequency too. So,
Absolutely.
right, if we're constantly talking about the death and the loss and this versus moving forward, it holds us, there too, in that pain and that suffering. And so, Seth, you've written a book called Smile from the Inside, and you came up with a S.M.I.L.E, S-M-I-L-E method. And can you talk a little bit more about that and how you came up with this method?
Sure. So remember when I said that my boyfriend had seroconverted to HIV positive? I was working on and off between Mexico and LA. And he told me it took me 24 hours to actually get to the ranch. It was a lemon growing company. So it would always take at least 12 to 15 hours to get back. And sometimes it would take 2 days to get back. So to LA. So the moment I arrived in the ranch, he called me and told me this. And I was like, oh God, now how
That's
am I going to get back?
devastating. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I immediately, my first thing was talk to him. I called his best friend, made sure that he went and got him right away. So he wasn't alone. We had this conversation, and then I made my way back, and as I was like running for the very last flight to get there, and I was finally going to get there by like 1 a.m. or 2 a.m. like that particular night, a lot of things had to converge. But I sat down and like row number 24, which is my favorite number, and I remember seeing this sign saying like smile somewhere. Like I don't remember, but there was a sign like in front of me that said smile, and I don't even know what it was for or whatever. And I immediately said, wouldn't it be cool? This is like, I know I'm about to have a really bad time in my life and go through some adversity. And I was like, wouldn't it be cool if I paid attention? So much so that I wrote down like everything I was feeling, all of the stuff that I'm going to go through and that we're going to go through, and come up with a method to help people move through similar situations. Literally, that's what this one thinks, right? Like as I'm racing back to someone. So I did just that. I took notes. I was like, okay, today I'm feeling this way. Today I'm feeling this way. And I noticed that I go through this pattern. And so it's the SMILE method, right? S-M-I-L-E. S is for shock. I don't think we can get around that. I believe it's the mind, body, and soul's way of allowing time for the information to sink in. Then I go through acceptance, which is part denial and part acceptance.
Yes.
So for example, when I got back from being held at gunpoint, when I landed back in the United States, I had some really good days. I was like, I can do this. I got this. Like, I'm going to focus at work. And there were other days that I was terrified and my anxiety was through the roof and I couldn't even get out of bed. So it's the moments where I'm like, oh my God, I got to take care of all these logistics. It feels like denial, right? But there's also part of it that's like, oh, okay, yeah, I guess I'm accepting it too. But then the next day is terrible.
Yeah.
So it's like that up and down point. And I think we all go through those moments, right? And then there comes a time where I believe that I is for in overwhelmed. So these are the overwhelming, significant, and poignant emotions that we all must go through. And I feel like a lot of people get stuck there because they don't want to feel the feelings and they don't want to lean into their emotions. And that's what I tell all my
distractions.
clients.
Yeah.
Right. Absolutely. And people don't want to feel, and people don't like, even today, I do this thing called Intuitive Tuesdays. It's like a video that I put out every Tuesday. And today was about, it's okay not being okay. It's okay to not be okay. And that was really hard. And sometimes it is still hard for me, like a work in progress myself, like to remember to lean into my emotions sometimes and know that it's okay to be a mess, because you'll get through it. And so getting through the other side is L for learning. So this is like the profound insight that we gain from situations, right? So when I was in Mexico or after this whole happened, like it took me months before I started sharing my experience with others and kind of allowing myself to tell the story. And I realized that it was not like going to Mexico was not worth my life anymore because it was so dangerous down there. So I made that decision, right? It was my first 6-figure job, and I was like, oh my God, it's amazing, but it wasn't worth my life. So the learning continues even years later. And then finally, there's the E for embrace, because acceptance is just not enough anymore. Like, we live in the 21st century. We need to enthusiastically embrace. We need to be grateful for that which has happened to us. If it's death, we need to be grateful that they're no longer here, that they're out of pain, that we had the years that we had with them, that we explored and we had the fun with them and the memories, it's to get to that point. And I know that there's levels of like embracing, right? And I also feel like paying it forward and honoring the loved ones. I know that's all part of it. But I believe that this method is essentially, I believe that most of us go through some form of these stages or components, right, to grief.
And grief can come in a variety of ways. It doesn't just have to be
Absolutely.
the loss of a loved one. It could be, like you said, your partner was HIV positive and that hit you like a ton of bricks, and because I can only imagine all the thoughts that were running through your mind, at that time when he shared that information with you. So grief doesn't just have to be the loss of a loved one. It could be the loss of a marriage. It could be, there's so many ways that we go through grief. Yeah.
Yep. Especially trauma too, right? So like, and murders. And I mean, there's so many things. Even like my husband told me last night, like he saw someone die yesterday, like fell off of at Universal Studios. They fell off of the elevator or something. And he literally saw escalator and they saw him die. And I was like, oh my God, that's so traumatic, cause I don't know if you've ever seen anyone die in front of your face. It's not fun.
I've seen hundreds. Yeah. So,
oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yes, you're right.
I'm probably not the average person, but that said, it's not easy to see that. I've seen peaceful deaths and I've seen traumatic where they've come in with a gunshot wound and they die right before your eyes at the hospital, and so it's not something, easy to process every time. And I think for me, I needed the smile method back then because I was in that stage of the I was just pushing it aside. Next day, seeing another death. Next day, pushing it aside. It was
Sure.
insane the amount that I was going through. But what happened is my body started to have all these alarm systems, going off and screaming at me.
Mm,
So I was just like
got
this
it.
pressure cooker that was holding on to, everything. But yet the reality is that it wasn't even my deaths to experience. It was the deaths of all
Yeah.
these other people. But
Yeah.
I was absorbing, a lot of those energies around me, and being highly empathic. That was something that I had to learn, that I don't need to absorb everybody's energy,
And that's a great point because my friend just asked me, her brother is doing some missionary work in Turkey right now after the earthquakes and stuff. And I'm doing today I'm actually outlining like a training for trauma experts there for how to help people on the ground and themselves. So you just confirmed my thought is like, I'm going to help them. I'm going to teach them the SMILE method and be like, this is for you too. You get to protect yourself too. And you get to like cleanse it off every day or clean yourself of it every day because you're seeing you're witnessing traumatic things every day. Then you can help other people, so thanks for saying that because
Yeah, that's
it makes me
powerful.
like,
I lived in Orlando at the time, and I was working at the hospital that responded to the Pulse shooting. So
mm,
the nightclub in
yeah,
Orlando where
yeah,
the shooter had come in and killed all those people. And so I had responded the day of, and it was just boots on the ground, anybody who could help to help. It was chaos. And,
mm,
our team had gone in to assist, not for the point of organ donation, but for the point of just assisting and helping with the amount of grief, death, loss, everything that was going on, terror, fear, it was crazy. And I remember coming home that day and just spiraling. I mean, my emotions were all over the place. And no, I did not go through that primarily, but I went through it secondarily. Went through that secondary trauma of
sure.
witnessing the families trying to find their loved ones. Is my loved one alive? Where are they? And so I had to respond to the coroner's office, and
Mm,
just seeing, I had an image in my mind when they opened up the door where all those people were that had passed. I saw a shoe. There was a shoe on the ground, and immediately my eye went straight to that shoe. And I had this overwhelming feeling of, that's a love, that's someone died, and there's that shoe, and it had blood on it. And so that was the impression that I had. And for weeks, I had dreams about that particular image in my mind. And so I think too, when we go through that, the caretakers, the people, first responders, like you said, your friend in Turkey, we go to help, but we don't really necessarily realize that we are also going through secondary trauma. And so when we're working through the SMILE method, or we're working through those stages, it's so important for us as the helpers or the assisters to go through this too, not just the people who have actually gone through the primary trauma. And, like I said, it's taken me years to move through that. And I've learned several modalities through my own journey. But,
mm,
Seth, what you're doing is so powerful, and it's so needed, and it's so helpful for those, even in the hospital settings, in firefighters, homicide detectives. I mean, some of the people that I've worked with, just the amount of things that they see and that get held in the subconscious mind, then your body responds and reacts. So I thank you so much for putting this information out there into the world and going through it. I mean, I can't imagine being held gunpoint, in Mexico, and that's terrifying in itself. And then going through what you went through with your boyfriend, and then it's just been one thing after another, but you're coming out on the other side and you've got a smile on your face. So I can do this. I can get through
yes,
this. And,
yes.
is there anything or any advice that you can share with people who might be going through a loss or some hardships right now that could be of benefit to them?
Sure. Number one is you will get through this. Like I tell people, like if I can experience everything I've experienced and still get up, like I'm doing pretty good. I think I want to say that it's okay not to be okay. I want them to lean into their emotions in safe spaces, right? So, like, there are places, like if you're at work, maybe you go to the bathroom if you're having an emotional episode, or maybe you go home for the day if you just can't focus. Um, or even, I guess, now that we're all virtual, turn your video off, right? If you're not
Yes.
looking your best. But
Mhm.
I want people to know that, like, you get to go through these stages and you get to move through grief, and you it's so important that we know that we can do it, or that we believe that we can do it. Um, so that's kind of like, I'm going to do a TEDx at some point this year, and that's kind of one of the major things is like, not only are you going to go through some type of 5 stages or components, but I want everyone to believe in the possibility of healing, and believe in the possibility that they will get through it, um, and they won't break. Um, and so,
And to always know that
yeah.
there is a healed version of you, right? There is
Mm,
a healed version of you. There is a happy version of you. It's visualizing that and aligning with that and getting yourself through the process of, releasing the trauma, releasing the hardship, the stored emotions that many of us, including myself,
mhm.
stuffed down for a really, really long time. And
Yep.
then allowing yourself time to process it, right? You gotta feel it to heal it. It's not an easy journey, but once you
True.
get on the other
Mm.
side, whoo, does it feel good?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So Seth, can you share
Yeah.
with us a little bit about some of the services that you provide and how people can connect with you?
Sure. Yeah, let's see. So I guess there's like 3 ways to work with me. I do one-on-one mediumship readings, intuitive readings, and coaching. I also do individual. So I have 2 courses going on right now, or about to start. One is I help people write their books fast and become best-selling authors. And I can do that either in a group setting or individual. And I help people overcome paralyzing grief. So if they're paralyzed, they can't get out of bed, they can't shift their focus back from the grief to anything else. I help them from a group coaching perspective as well as an individual. I'm sure
And
I do
what's your
more than
website?
that, but
How can
oh
people
yeah,
find you?
thanks. So I am SethEliot.com. It's 1L1T. I am SethEliot.com. Everything is there. Um, um, yeah, they'll need to find me. And
Great.
then on socials, Seth Eliot Santoro usually is the handle, or Seth E. Santoro. And yeah, I think that's about it.
Good. And I'll leave all that information in the notes on the show too. So Seth, I really appreciate you coming on the show. I appreciate your energy that you bring, and I'm just seeing things flying over your head the whole show.
Oh, really? You saw more?
I don't know.
Wow.
I don't know if other people can see it, but I'm seeing things. Hey, that's a sign my clairvoyance is
Amazing.
starting to amp up. But
Is
I
is
I
is
do truly
here.
believe
Yeah,
when we connect with other people who have activated their abilities, it helps us activate our abilities more too. It's tuning into
agreed.
that. So thank you so much
Absolutely.
for
Thank you so
being
much for having me.
yeah, and being transparent. I know, some of the things that you talked about today were not easy to talk about. So thanks for coming on the show and bringing a smile to the
You're
listeners and to the
welcome.
watchers.
Thank you. I'm so honored to be here.
You deserve to navigate your life in alignment with health, happiness, and abundance. To learn more about the services that I provide, including Beyond Quantum Healing Hypnosis, EFT tapping, and the Emotion Code, visit my website at www.theexistentialempath.com.